Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. It's Monday morning. Welcome back from the weekend. Lindsay, good to be with you. You had a little less travel than usual, I think. You were actually in our fair city the whole weekend.
I spent the time in D.C. and I actually explored places like Eastern Market. I feel like it's going to be an ongoing thing. Like, what did I do to kind of embrace D.C. a little bit more? This weekend was my first time spending a weekend here.
Oh, nice.
Intentionally. So, yeah.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I had a good one. My brother was visiting last week. He went home and played some Dungeons & Dragons this weekend, which always makes me happy.
I always hear you guys in my ear talking about that. I never know what you're referring to.
And you never will.
Coming up next on Rising, I'll discuss how President Trump is receiving millions of dollars in gifts while Americans are struggling economically.
We'll also discuss Andrew Cuomo's new line of attack on Zohran Mamdani.
We'll also touch on Trump saying he might deploy the National Guard to D.C. to fight crime. But first, we're going to start with Robby's radar. So what's on your radar today?
Let's get to it. Greg Gutfeld is a pretty funny guy. He's the late-night host on Fox News, which makes him the most well-watched comedian of cable news entirely. Yours truly has been on the show before. Really enjoyed the opportunity to reach such an audience, such a big audience. On the merits, it's the biggest audience there is as far as late night goes. So it makes sense to me. The one late night great would recognize another. To that end, late night host Jimmy Fallon hosted Greg Gutfeld recently. Here's a bit of Gutfeld discussing his career trajectory.
Stuff Magazine was there for a couple of years.
Stuff Magazine.
Yeah, it was amazing. Got fired from there. Then went to Men's Health. Went to Maxim. Had to leave the country for, no, let's not get into that. God. In the UK and got fired from that. And so I was just sitting at a bar in Chelsea, and a friend says, you know, there's a Fox that wants to do a late night show. Are you interested? And I'm like, dude, I'm broke. So I will do anything. So they flew me over, and I started doing this show, Red Eye.
Gutfeld is a very funny man, and he's also successful, which is why Fallon had him on. In fact, Gutfeld bears the moniker King of Late Night because his audience on the conservative news channel Fox is higher than his competitors. It's a no-brainer for Fallon to host him as a kind of friendly mutual promotion. And yet, liberal mainstream media figures are furious that Fallon did this. Just look at the headlines here. Jimmy Fallon kisses the conservative ring, said Vulture. As if bothering to engage a conservative was an explicit endorsement of everything that person thinks. The Daily Beast spun it this way. Jimmy Fallon fawns all over MAGA late-night host Greg Gutfeld in softball chat, as if a humorous late-night show needs to be some vicious skewering of non-liberal perspectives. And of course, what remains of BuzzFeed was eager to attack Fallon for daring to platform Gutfeld at all. This seals it for me. People are completely turning on Jimmy Fallon for his recent talk show guest, and it's not pretty. That was the BuzzFeed headline. Remember back when this clickbait tripe actually mattered? When liberals rewarded BuzzFeed-esque content farming with millions of page views? When easily triggered progressives ruled the discourse with an iron fist? Well, guess what? Those days are over. Now no one cares what the pearl-clutching liberals of BuzzFeed have to say about anything. Gutfeld has a bigger audience, and for what it's worth, good on Gutfeld for being willing to platform alternative voices himself. Good on Fallon for being willing to platform alternative voices. Now, they didn't talk about politics, and that's okay. Not everything needs to be a political confrontation. Gutfeld, for his part, was incredibly magnanimous and thanked Fallon for having the guts to have him on. Seems like Fallon understands that late night is losing ground. Stephen Colbert, anyone? If he wants to become unprofitable and unsuccessful and ultimately unemployable, like the perennially unfunny Stephen Colbert, then he needs to innovate a bit. I'm happy to see it, and probably the country's millions of conservatives were as well. More of this, please.
I was happy to see that Fallon is open-minded about his guests. I think Gutfeld, we have to be really specific that he is funny to you, but problematic to other people.
Problematic? What's problematic about it?
I had to make sure that I was accurate.
Okay,
I didn't want to bother your friend or the guest who you are on his show. So he suggested that conservatives should reclaim the word Nazi the same way that blacks reclaim the N-word. That was on it. That's a quote from him.
It was probably
Another
joking.
One, what's funny about that? What's funny about both of those? We talked about parody.
I'd have to find the context.
Fine. He also said that crime would disappear if women did. I mean, I guess that's a joke, but like, you know, these are things that have come out of his mouth. He oversimplifies the Holocaust all the time. People get really upset with him and the conversations that he has. And I watched his show because I find it interesting. Charlemagne is a friend of mine who's been on his show, and I've seen the way that they banter, right? So obviously there's a space that he allows for people who might disagree with him to come on and have dialogue. But Jimmy Fallon, particularly, I think people are annoyed with him because in 2016, you'll remember, he had President Trump on right before the election. and these same headlines that you're reading probably happened again. But then Jimmy Fallon went ahead and did interviews in magazines and apologized, saying, that was wrong of me to platform him and not ask any serious questions. So to come here in 2025, a couple of years later, and do the same thing and not ask any questions about, and not that he needs to be Barbara Walters, right? Let's be clear about the space.
It's a comedy
But he
show.
still can ask a question that obviously, if there's somebody who many consider problematic, including possibly you based on your dialogue about having Trump on, which I want to be clear, I think a sitting possible president should be on talk shows and every type of show. But Gutfeld is not, and so you should definitely provide a space to ask him at least one question. Like, do you ever regret some? You could lightly. Do you ever regret some of the things you say on air? You think you go too far with like that's not an appropriate question. If me and you were at the bar, like I can ask you that. You can ask me that.
Well, fine, that's fine. But why is the assumption that the liberal perspective is the default perspective when there are more? Again, Gutfeld has a broader audience. There are more Trump supporters in this country than there are liberals. So why is the viewpoint like, oh, this is a weird outsider person, and we got to make sure we ask them some confrontational question? Like you wouldn't say that, I don't think, of like a liberal comedian. Like, let's make sure we grill them over some stupid thing liberals believe. Is I don't think exactly the perspective. In fact, I think if a liberal comedian were to go on Gutfeld, as happens from time to time, a cool left person, I don't think they're going to be mercilessly skewered.
Well, I certainly think that there should be space for, this is part of the conversation of, like, I like the line you said about clutching your pearls. That's the issue with Democrats right now, right? They're constantly, can't believe, like, we're not in that time anymore, okay? Everybody younger than the boomers who you like to constantly throw ridicule at, which respectfully, there's a lot of reasons why you possibly can. I still think that, we need to go with the times, and the times are a little bit more free. Conversations should happen. People on different sides of the aisle should communicate. We're not very much, we can't speak to you if you voted for this person or did this thing. But I think with Gutfeld, like, he created a space where he's very vocal. Sometimes his jokes get a little bit go all the way over into the level inappropriate, and so you just kind of watch
whether the joke is inappropriate.
I guess his audience loves. I guess the audience loves to watch that.
Can't jokes be inappropriate and still be funny? I don't know what the context were for the examples you provided. I assume the crime would disappear if women disappear. I mean, men cause most crime, so this is like a nagging wife joke. Like, if your old ball and chain wasn't driving you up a wall, you wouldn't go commit crime. Is that maybe the joke? Which is
fine,
pretty benign, if so.
Possibly, but the
how straight to the
example
moon kind of thing.
I'll explain where that one came
All
from.
right.
It came from, like, okay, how many times that liberals might call somebody fascist or Nazi-esque or use
and then it loses
Gestapo,
all meaning.
It loses the meaning,
Yeah.
and so he's like, okay, so let's just recoup the word in the same way that we might hear a rap song saying that word. And so that was his point. But it's just like, distasteful, correct? Like, don't we want to make sure that we're having like a little bit of decorum,
It's kind of like you're calling me a fascist because I think that the government ought to do something about the crime. Right, doesn't really make me a fascist, but I might be called a fascist for expressing that opinion. In fact, when we're going to be talking about the D.C. whole crime situation, I'm very excited for that discussion. That's coming up next. People won't want to miss it. And I saw somebody on Reddit, I think, this went viral on social media, just saying there's too much crime and I would like there to be less, and it got taken down for being, oh, you're a fascist for thinking that.
It got taken down?
Yeah, by Reddit liberal moderators. So that goes to show how far the left, on a couple things, where you can't tell jokes, you can't, want common sense solutions.
But you can say stuff like, Jimmy Kimmel's not funny, right, to you.
Yeah.
We watch his clips, I'm over here cackling, you have a straight face. I don't think Gutfeld's that funny, honestly.
That's fine.
And so, like, maybe people are just saying, like, Jimmy Fallon has a big audience. Like, come on, pick somebody else. Pick anyone else.
I'm humorless, and I don't appreciate comedy, and I've never once laughed in my entire life. So I don't really think any of these people are funny. But, people like to be entertained one way or another. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have just a great show for you today. I can't wait to discuss it. We're going to be doing something interesting technologically behind the scenes that we're not even going to tell you about.
Yeah, we'll tell you about it later.
Quite an experiment.
So later on Rising, I'll be talking about pushback from Robert F. Kennedy is getting over a shooting at CDC headquarters.
Plus, we will also discuss how the Epstein saga seems to be becoming less and less of a political liability for Republicans.
And Gavin Newsom is issuing a warning to President Trump if he doesn't retreat on his gerrymandering attack. But first, Robby, what is on your radar?
Let's get to it. All right, here we go. Now send in the troops. That's President Donald Trump's plan to reduce violent crime in the nation's capital. The president made the announcement yesterday that he would be implementing a 30-day takeover of Washington, D.C.'s police department and then supplementing their effort with 800 National Guard troops. Here was part of Trump's announcement.
The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse.
In response, Democrats, liberal pundits, and the mainstream media reacted with fury that someone would try to actually address D.C.'s crime problems. The responses ranged from anger over the federal takeover to denial that there's even a problem at all to desperate attempts to talk about something else. Seriously, the national reporters at the press conference swiftly pivoted to questions about Russia-Ukraine, which is the only subject that holds the mainstream media's interest for more than a few seconds. Now, my favorite response was from CNN's Dana Bash, who took the opportunity to remind her viewers about January 6th.
The most violent moment in recent history in D.C. was January 6th. And it was an attack on the United States Capitol by a lot of people who were doing it in the name of Donald Trump. And it included, the people who were hurt included members of law enforcement.
Okay, look, January 6th was in fact very bad. It's bad when protesters fight with cops, and it's bad when they smash windows, something left-wing protesters did in D.C. throughout the summer of 2020, but most violent moment in recent history? What does that even mean? Here are the actual facts. Violence in Washington, D.C. spiked massively as a result of the pandemic, reversing a trend of greatly declining violence since the mid-1990s. D.C. saw an unprecedented wave of carjackings and more murders in 2023 than any previous year on record. Now look, it's also true that violence has declined since then, and that's great. It should be recognized and celebrated, with the caveat that a D.C. police commander was suspended for falsifying crime data a few months back. What's really going on, in my opinion, is that three basic realities about crime and disorder in D.C. are being conflated. First, D.C. has plenty of gang-related violence that is not random. The victims of these killings, which are usually shootings, are typically other gang members. Disproportionately, this violence takes place in poorer and historically unsafe neighborhoods. This is the same kind of crime that many large cities struggle with, from Chicago to Detroit to Philadelphia to Baltimore and so on. The way to address it is to investigate and solve more murder cases by giving homicide detectives more resources and then actually prosecuting unlawful firearm possessions. We have to take away guns not from law-abiding citizens, but from individuals who are already disqualified from having weapons due to prior convictions. Any city that does that will substantially reduce its violent crime problem. Now, the second issue is mentally ill drug addicts occupying public spaces and setting up tent cities. This peaked during the pandemic itself, when vagrants turned Union Station, one of D.C.'s most beautiful spaces, into a shanty town for addicts. Note that this isn't actually the city government's fault. Federal property, like the green space in front of the train station, is actually managed by the feds, who were just not doing a very good job during the pandemic. Thankfully, those tent cities are now mostly gone. The third issue, and by some measures the most concerning, in my opinion, since it's quite new and novel, there are informal gangs, bands of teenagers entering more affluent, theoretically safer areas of the city and engaging in violence and vandalism, muggings, carjackings, etc. This category of crime is what has prompted Trump's decision to take over the police response. A 19-year-old former employee of Doge was attacked over the weekend by a group of unruly teens. Now, as a citizen of Washington, D.C., this is the sort of thing I'm most worried about. I've seen it in my own neighborhood this summer, which prompted the area of D.C. I live in to start enforcing curfews for teenagers. Anecdotally, a more robust police presence has deterred this kind of crime, at least somewhat, where I live. Now, as Trump grapples with these waves of carjacking teenagers, I'd say that the main thing is for the police to just be more available. I don't want to turn D.C. into some kind of authoritarian surveillance state where every kid is stopped when he gets off the metro. But more law enforcement officers on our streets monitoring the situation will mean a reduction in crimes of opportunity. And as for all the CNN liberals screaming about Trump's decision, they may be complaining about it on your televisions, but they certainly aren't complaining about it in private. On the contrary, it's readily apparent to most people who live in D.C., Democrats and Republicans, that something has gone very wrong in the nation's capital.
I think the conversation is that
you're moving here,
want...
so you have an interesting perspective. You've seen, to heck with it, I'm coming here.
I've lived in North Philadelphia too, because I went to college at Temple, and I think it's all relative, right? When we talk about the numbers of actually things happening, there are cases to be argued in places like Philadelphia where the crime rate was the highest in the country. DC is not even on the top 10 list of where the most crimes are happening in recent history, okay? And that's the biggest problem here, is that President Trump is referring to this as a state of emergency, which is allowing him to use the jurisdiction that he's using to bring in federal authorities like the National Guard. But then the contradiction in which Dana Bash was talking about with January 6th is that there was a long hesitation to bring in the National Guard for people that were also hurting police officers and doing things that were against the law.
Well,
and so I think that
Republicans blame Nancy Pelosi for that because the chief of police has said he asked for a federal response and she turned him down.
Okay, so the buck doesn't
not on Trump.
The buck doesn't stop with the president all of a sudden. The buck stops with Nancy Pelosi. Fine, if that's your argument. But either way, when Trump's
that's not my argument. That's the police chief's argument.
When Trump's always saying the buck stops with Biden, and now I would say he has to wear the hat sometimes. And so that's the biggest thing, is that we're disproportionately acting like D.C. is in any situation that big cities aren't in. Like the top crime is happening in Memphis. This is a Republican-led state and a city that you should look at then if President Trump wants to get involved. Also very concerning about his extremely long press conference yesterday was the fact that he said he wants to go into other cities like Baltimore, where crime is down, like New York City. And nobody asked for that. And so that also will require congressional approval. And also, it's not the same as D.C. D.C. is this anomaly where he can actually come and do what he's doing. But after 30 days, he has to have a longer conversation with Congress. So unless he wants people to litigate this endlessly, why not engage with Muriel Bowser and figure out how she wants to move forward? Why not make an announcement that she's caught off guard by? I mean, now she has to talk. It's like you're playing chess and just cheating the game. She didn't say she's against it.
She did not say she's against it. I think she welcomes the help.
Yeah, but Republican standpoint is to allow states in municipalities to govern themselves. And so the fact that he didn't allow a conversation to happen prior to making some major announcement about what federal authorities is going to do should be against all things. Like you said, you don't want an authoritarian state. You just want to be safe. I think that that's a basic thing for anybody who lives in D.C., Democrat or Republican. That's fine. But the problem is the federal overstep and the overreach right now that wasn't necessary. The moment didn't call for an emergency. It didn't call for an emergency.
It feels, again, I've lived here continuously for the last 10 years and on and off for the 5 years before that, and it feels markedly unsafer here. Now,
but I can't go off feelings. I have to go off numbers.
Feelings are not the truth.
Homicide is down 12%.
Yes, up from a anomalous high 2 years ago. But the key difference, I think, is the only way I can square it. Yes, I believe the statistics. Yes, the violence is down, and that's good. But the violence used to be constrained, frankly. I mean, maybe this is not a good thing, but to areas of the city that are in disrepair, that are disproportionately poor. And that's awful for those people, and we should have been doing more to help them all along. But now people who don't live there are dealing with more violence. Because, again, we're dealing with bands of teenagers between the ages of 14 and 20 who are attacking people at random, stealing cars, way more crimes of opportunity. Not just, it's gangs shooting other gangs, predominantly shooting other criminals. Again, I'm not saying, oh no, that's fine then, people dying is people dying, but now people who are not in the game of crime are being victimized at much higher rates. That's what I think the statistics are not exactly showing.
There's so much for me to unpack here, but I know we're going to be talking about it probably as long as its presence exists in D.C., so we'll have plenty of opportunity to keep talking about this.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for watching. It is, what day is today?
Wednesday.
It's Wednesday morning.
Midweek.
How about that?
So we made it halfway through. How you doing?
Halfway through this just joy fest. How nice.
Day 2 officially me being here. I can see that smile. It's genuine.
Oh, you are such a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited about the new job, and I'm excited to see you excited about it.
Okay, well, tell us before you burst my bubble, what's on your radar?
I think we might find some room for common agreement today, but we'll find out.
Okay.
My radar is about the situation in D.C. with the police. National Democratic politicians and mainstream media commentators have spent the last 24 years blasting President Donald Trump for announcing a federal takeover of Washington, D.C., police. For liberal and progressive critics of the president, this is undoubtedly yet more evidence of his authoritarian tendencies. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, for instance, condemned the president's move as a deliberate distraction from his incompetence and accused him of hypocrisy because his failure to deploy the National Guard 4 years ago is what contributed to January 6th. Even though former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund has repeatedly clarified that Pelosi herself was the person responsible for failing to enlist the Guard. And on CNN, Abby Phillip described Trump's takeover of the police as akin to Batman coming to save Gotham, as if that's a bad thing. Let's watch.
Let's get right to what America's talking about. Donald Trump makes himself Batman, and the nation's capital is Gotham City. The President of the United States has declared himself crime fighter in chief, and he's taking over Washington's police force.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm sold. Now, in all seriousness, there's plenty of reason to be generally suspicious of getting the feds more involved in local issues, so I understand a certain level of reflexive distrust at what Trump is doing here. I also think it's important to tell the truth and be mindful of the facts, not just people's feelings. So just because D.C. feels unsafe to some people doesn't necessarily mean that it is. We should be mindful of statistics that show that crime in the nation's capital has thankfully gone down since 2023, although let's add a little asterisk to that. We'll circle back in a minute. All that said, whether crime is technically down or technically up, it's crystal clear that Washington, D.C. has too much crime, from gangland shootings to mentally ill people attacking pedestrians to flash mobs of teenagers stealing cars, vandalizing convenience stores. All of that is happening. That's why I find it very, very interesting that at the local level, the relevant political authorities are not echoing the comments by national Democrats and the media. Consider, for instance, the stance of Muriel Bowser, D.C.'s incumbent mayor. Bowser issued a face-saving statement that the federal takeover was, quote, unprecedented and unsettling. But she did not vow to fight it. She did not vow to oppose it. She did not vow to try to counter Trump on it. And in fact, she seems to be sending positive vibes to Trump that she wants to work with him rather than against him on this. That's because she knows city residents are tremendously frustrated with what's happening in the district. And more police could make a difference. Moreover, D.C.'s police union straightforwardly supports Trump on this. They're backing him. Though the union thinks full staffing of the local police department is more important as a long-term solution. And they're right. Now, indeed, the things that would really go a long way towards solving the crime problem in D.C. have to do with budgeting, staffing, and government competence. The major problem, the single biggest problem impacting the justice system in D.C. was the lack of a working crime lab for years. D.C.'s forensics lab was de-accredited due to various problems several years back. While it's now up and running again, it has no means of processing ballistic evidence. That significantly hampers the ability of prosecutors to charge criminals effectively. As a result, D.C. has a very low prosecution rate, very low conviction rate for serious crime. Maybe Judge Jeanine Pirro can fix that. Now, we need more resources for homicide detectives, prosecutors, and we also need the backlog of Superior Court judges to be addressed. If you don't have the system working to investigate, to prosecute, and to convict criminals, well, you'll have more crime. It's that simple. Now, let's return to that asterisk. Now, it may not be the case that D.C.'s crime statistics are even accurate. I'll let former Representative Peter Meyer make the case.
I think Mayor Bowser may also know that there's an ongoing investigation in her police department over the potentially manipulation of those statistics, that there have been a downclassing of some of the crimes, there's been a massaging of the numbers and the reporting in order to fit them more beneficially into the FBI crime stats. So she may know some things that national Democrats are not paying attention to.
Food for thought. And I, of course, also want to congratulate former Representative Peter Meyer on his awesome flowing
locks.
Love the hairdo.
What about me? You didn't say.
You look lovely as always, Lindsay.
You know what is so interesting? I've been watching Muriel Bowser and wondering about her disposition, because it's very much like saying enough to say that this is not what she would have preferred, but also respectful, which is something that I think that it stands to do the country well, right? Yeah. She actually is having a dialogue with President Trump, and I think being the adult in the room. So if President Trump would have had a dialogue with her prior to making national announcements, that could have been a strategy, because I don't think that there's an issue with keeping the streets of D.C. more safe. I think the issue is that DC is not the #1 crime issue in America, and so hyper-focusing on it makes it hyper-political. I also understand that DC has no statehood, so it's a totally different example when Trump is coming in here and bringing in federal authorities, but when he's threatening to do it in New York or California or other cities like Baltimore, that's when it becomes concerning because he's overstepping what should be done in a federal capacity, even by standards that Republicans hold states to and want them to govern themselves. And I
hear half the territory is federally controlled.
Understood. So, but I also think it's a bit of micromanaging. You know, I think that people could handle crime in D.C. based off of the fact that it has come down from its highest point. That doesn't mean there isn't room to do better. It just
maybe
means,
if you believe those statistics.
But you don't have
to.
We're
manipulated.
The biggest thing I think is when Trump does this press conference and says he wants to give police authority to do whatever they want. I think for me that's concerning because it's going to raise a slew of constitutional issues. I also know that you and I agree on stop and frisk and that being a poor policy. And I understand that when national or local police are in the officer and given the in a position of power and given the authority to kind of look through anyone, stop crime in any way. That was largely unsuccessful in New York. And so when we come here and think about how the communities will be affected and we're piling everyone together, homeless people, people of color, young people, Black people are 5 times more, according to the NAACP, more likely to be stopped by the police than white people. And so when we have these issues coming up and Trump is just pointing out young kids, we know what these coded messages mean. And so that's my biggest...
5 times more likely to be involved in the city of D.C. because they're more likely to be involved in criminal activity.
Yeah, but
so
also
so there's a disproportionate.
But the people that are not, are constantly being berated like they were with stop and frisk, right. And that door has already been opened. We've seen how this works. So without some strategy and programs to maybe get youth off the street, right? The incidents you're talking about in your neighborhood are young people are running around late at night. Right. Okay, so what about actually rectifying some of these things? What about finding things or activities for young kids that don't have things to do to be occupied? What about trying to find rehabilitation programs for homeless people that are on drugs?
Sure, I support.
I want to hear solutions.
All those things were shut down as a result of COVID governance, and that was a huge mistake because the crime problem we have now is a direct result of closing down after-school programs, community programs for at-risk youth. We now see the problems with that. So I agree with you, but I think having more police on the streets will deter the teenage criminal activity because they're hanging out with their friends, getting into a little bit of trouble, drinking a little bit, doing some drugs, and then they're like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if we carjack someone, or wouldn't it be funny if we rob CVS? If there's a police officer, there's a police car parked outside the CVS or on the block, they're not going to do that. This is not thought out. This is opportunistic, and that's where I think a stronger police presence for the next 30 days to the end of the summer will actually deter some crime, and then we can get things under control, and then do the long-lasting stuff because this isn't a permanent solution. We need to staff the actual police, which is what Mayor Bowser and the police union has said, and we need to get this ballistics running at the crime lab, for goodness sake. That's the main one.
The main issue for me, and I know we have to go, is that you're just scattering people. You're scattering the homeless people. You might be scattering people who could be potentially criminals. Yeah, they might get out of D.C. for 30 days, but then they'll go to Virginia and Maryland. So what are we talking about? You're not actually getting them out of town. You're not providing solutions for, long-term effectiveness. And so that's my biggest issue with this entire bombardment of D.C.
Well, the homeless issue is hard because it's hard to get people to take antipsychotic medication who are in a very difficult mental health or drug place. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Thursday morning, I believe, and we're just having so much fun already, aren't we?
We are, and also you are here tomorrow, so the audience needs to know.
Hey, that's right.
Robby on a Friday.
Me and Amber did a little swapping around, so I will be here in her place next 2 Fridays.
So I have 2 more days of radar, today and tomorrow.
Aren't you excited?
I'm thrilled. What's on your radar today?
Well, you will not be surprised at what I am talking about. Now, after just 2 days, President Donald Trump is already trumpeting his decision to federalize the Washington, D.C. police force and send in the National Guard as a rousing success. As of about yesterday, you see a big change and people are feeling safer already, Trump said at the Kennedy Center on Wednesday. They were afraid to walk out. They're not afraid anymore. Let's watch some of his remarks.
The stats went through the roof. They had a man that was forced to put up stats like they were doing better. They're not doing better. Crime is the worst it's ever been, but it started as of about yesterday. You see a big change, and people are feeling safe already. I've had so many calls. Thank you, sir. Thank you. They were afraid to walk out. They're not afraid anymore.
Now, city residents who are eager for sound solutions to DC's enduring crime problems should hold their applause for now, because a temporary display of police force, I'm sorry to say, is not a panacea for the widespread government incompetence that continues to cripple DC's criminal justice system. Now, dozens of National Guard troops did appear on the National Mall on Tuesday, and up to 800 of them are expected to come to DC by next week. The increased police presence in the nation's capital this week has yielded more than 100 arrests. The most significant category of arrests on Tuesday was for firearms violations, with 33 arrested on such charges and 24 guns confiscated by the police. Authorities also arrested 23 illegal immigrants, 7 alleged drug offenders, and 1 homicide suspect. Now, federal law enforcement agents were also spotted in the upscale Georgetown neighborhood, as well as Navy Yard, an area of the city that has seen a significant number of carjackings in recent years. Trust me, including that of a sitting member of Congress. It is not so great there, I say from personal experience. Now, the crime situation in D.C. is extremely complex. The statistics are not entirely reliable, and jurisdictional standoffs between the city and the feds were common even before Trump's latest move. Moreover, several factors, including the appallingly high number of murders in 2023 and the enduring trend of marauding bands of teenagers committing opportunistic acts of violence and theft, certainly created the impression that the city is as dangerous as ever, even though official reports suggest that the post-pandemic crime surge has abated. Well, Trump's appraisal of the crime situation may be not entirely in sync with reality, but it is nevertheless true that the nation's capital should be setting a much better example. D.C. residents certainly deserve more from their government. Now, in theory, hiring more police officers could definitely be a part of the puzzle. Both the mayor and the chief of police maintain that police staffing levels are historically low. A temporary infusion of National Guard troops stationed around the monuments, which are relatively safe areas, well, that will not make much of a difference, however. Now, the incidents that kicked off Trump's federal takeover was the attack on a former Doge staffer in one of the trendy areas of the city, DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, that area, which has high levels of foot traffic. Now, an increased police presence in neighborhoods that have recently become prone to antisocial behavior from large numbers of young people would probably deter opportunistic criminal attacks. Of course, tackling the most serious kinds of crime in D.C., gun homicides, would involve sending more police, or at least the most experienced police, into the most crime-ridden areas of the city, Wards 7 and 8, which are on the other side of the Anacostia River. Now, unfortunately, of course, tackling the most serious kinds of gun crime in D.C. would involve sending more police, at least the most experienced police, into the most crime-ridden areas of the city, Ward 7 and 8, which are on the other side of the Anacostia River. Unfortunately, as my friend, former Libertarian Party Chair Joseph Bishop Henchman documented in an article for Reason magazine, police officers with the most seniority and expertise get their choice of jobs and usually leave the really tough policing to the rookies. Indeed, this speaks to the city's overall problem, which is well explained by Bishop Henchman. Local government incompetence caused a total breakdown of D.C.'s criminal justice system. A main culprit is the D.C. Forensics Laboratory, which was deaccredited in 2021 due to numerous problems. This meant that for years, prosecutors had no working lab to help process evidence to assist with cases. As a consequence of this and other issues, successful prosecutions plummeted. Earlier this year, the crime lab did regain accreditation, though it's reportedly still unable to do ballistics testing. For D.C.'s crime situation to improve dramatically, look, high crime areas need somewhat more attention from the authorities. Homicide detectives need more resources to be put toward solving cases, and then prosecutors need both the tools and the willpower to do their jobs effectively. If federal troops intend to assist with any of that, great. If not, then we just can't declare victory before the battle is over. Sorry.
I think that a day or two into a new strategy to go and do a press conference about how much of a big success this is.
You don't feel safer already, Lindsay?
No, and I actually just moving here, so I actually don't see any major differences except for a larger police presence. But what I did see, I watched a video online yesterday, was people that were sitting in their home relaxing and then had National Guard at their door, people of color that were being asked for their ID, and they were like, do you have a warrant? Or
at their door?
Yeah, they were just sitting in the front yard on their stoop, as one should who buys property. The stoop is also yours. And the police walked the first step on the stoop, the federal official, and said, may I see your ID? He's like, I live here. And they had a pleasant exchange that was fine enough. But like, imagine you purchase property and somebody just walking up to you because they just picked and choose who they should stop and ask for ID at their own home. And so these are just videos that I'm seeing online. So like,
I don't know if they're going to someone's home to ask for. I assume they're following up on an investigation.
No, they asked him, "Do you have a warrant or something that you're looking for? I live here." And he was like, "No, you didn't hear that Trump is sending federal authorities." This is a whole exchange. And the officer was nice enough. The federal officer was nice enough, but he was like, "You didn't hear that Trump has people in town doing this?" And the guy was like, "No, I didn't hear."
Sending to people's homes?
Well, I think they just were in a neighborhood and someone happened to live there, as people do. Like people live in Navy Yard, like people have brownstones, or how do you guys call them here?
Brownstones.
Yeah, okay, brownstones.
Row houses.
Row houses. So people have those, so they could be sitting on their stoops. So they're in several neighborhoods. Row houses are all over DC, so you know that people have stoops in front yards. And so somebody just like, ID, maybe it was a couple of guys, and I was just like, okay, this is kind of.
I would like to know more about the context of this.
I will
Obviously,
send you the video.
I don't think the
video.
police should be just, nor do the police want to be just bothering people for no reason at their homes. What we want is, again, the bands of teenagers to be deterred from opportunistic crime. We want more resources put towards solving gun homicides. I want more senior police officers sent across the Anacostia River to the most crime-plagued areas of the city. Right now, the most juvenile, rookiest cops are the ones sent there because of the way seniority works. That's always a problem in government contracting and government employment, that once you work there longer, you get more seniority, you get to deploy yourself to the easiest jobs and send the newest employees on the hardest missions. This is a serial problem with government work. It's, by the way, the reason why none of the escalators in DC work. They're always broken at every metro station because the elevator repairmen are unionized, and the union always sends the least experienced people to go actually do the hard escalator fixing jobs.
So I would love to hear a press conference in a real duration of time, and I know this might go on for 30 days without congressional approval, but I would love to hear a 30-day report about how many long-term solutions began implementation to see how people can actually have sustainability and in the city that's not crime. And so part of that would be saying, okay, we've moved homeless people off the streets. Here's where they're gone. Here's the shelters they've gone. Here are the programs that they're in. Not, oh, they're in Virginia. Oh, now they're in Maryland. We push them out because we want to make our city look good where the White House is. I want to also hear people say, okay, kids are less out in the street doing stuff at 11 o'clock at night. We've created these 5 youth programs that actually have had success. We've seen enrollment skyrocket. I would love to hear this information paired together because, like Mayor Bowser is saying, she's very much open to the idea of having extra protection. There are people all over the city that want to feel safe and sound with their families, but I'd like to hear some reports about long-term solution and not so much showmanship.
Mayor Bowser is happy to have the help, I think, from the national troops.
She did a lot of different.
Well, she knows that we need to hire 800 more police officers.
She can't just be like, I'm unhappy, because she knows that she's going to have problems.
She knows that people are unhappy with the level of crime.
It's a debatable topic.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. It is Friday morning, which I'm not usually here for, but I'm filling in for Amber. She filled in for me. We did a little swappy swap action.
I'm happy to have you on a Friday. Love Amber, and hopefully we'll all be together soon. So coming up on Rising, I'll be discussing Governor Gavin Newsom trolling President Trump and firing back at his redistricting effort.
Also, Meta is under fire for some of its apparent chatbot rules that have since been deleted.
And a Republican congresswoman says she's seen evidence of interdimensional beings. But first, Robby, what is on your Friday radar?
Let's get to it. Well, all week, Lindsay and I have been debating President Trump's approach to tackling the crime problem in Washington, D.C. Our debate mirrors a national debate that's taking place. Republicans are applauding Trump's decision to send in federal troops and impose order on the crime-plagued national capital, whereas Democrats and the mainstream media, progressives, are disdaining this action, quibbling over the statistics, or even defiantly insisting that everything is perfectly fine in D.C. A characteristic response came from House Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who said he feels totally safe at all times walking around the city.
Are you scared walking around Washington, D.C. these days?
I walk around all the time. I wake up early in the morning sometimes and take a nice walk as the sun is rising around some of the Capitol and the other monuments and things, and I feel perfectly safe. They're full of it. Look, here's what they've done, Aaron. Plain and simple. Donald Trump wants to distract.
Sure. Now, look, as I've said yesterday, it's perfectly fine to disagree with Trump's particular strategy for combating crime, i.e. deploying the National Guard. If your perspective is that we need more local police detectives, competent prosecutors, and a working crime lab more than we need federal troops, well, look, I agree with you. If your perspective is everything's fine, there's nothing to see here, you're either lying or you haven't spent much time in my neck of the woods. And here's the thing, local Democrats like Mayor Muriel Bowser already know this. They also know something that progressive elites apparently don't. The American people agree with Donald Trump on crime. In fact, they trust Republicans so much more than Democrats on this issue, it's not even funny. Here's CNN pollster Harry Enton breaking down the numbers.
He was way underwater at minus 13 points views of term number one. But look at where he is now. He's on the positive side of the ledger. He's on the positive side at plus 1 point. Americans view Trump far more favorably now on crime than they did a year ago. And while this polling doesn't take into account what's exactly happening in D.C. right now, it does take into account what happened in Los Angeles, what's happened earlier this year. And Americans, for the most part, actually view Trump favorably. Crime is one of Trump's best issues. It's one of the reasons why he wants to talk about crime, because it favors him.
Trump is massively ahead on this issue. Now, it's a big winner for him. Here's more. Smart Democrats know it. I was not surprised to see Chris Matthews, the liberal commentator who's by far the most plugged in to what ordinary Americans think, making this point on MSNBC.
And the murder rate, you can't keep saying violent crime is down, but the murder rate's up. To the average person, the murder rate's about life and death. You don't brag about a rising murder rate. And the Democrats are, I agree with you, Mika, they're falling into the trap of defending what's indefensible.
It's a trap. Yes, it's a trap. I mean, if it's not a winner politically to say, oh, you're wrong, look at the data.
It's a trap. I always love a Star Wars reference, as you know. Now, I'm not in the habit of giving advice to Democrats, but it seems to me that avoiding the trap is pretty easy. Just say the following. Crime levels in cities like D.C. are unacceptable. It's true that things are better than they were during the pandemic, but Americans deserve a baseline of safer cities. To that end, we advocate XYZ policies to make cities safer. In D.C., that means hiring and training more homicide detectives, deploying more authority figures to patrol dangerous neighborhoods, deterring teenage gangs from forming, and giving the criminal justice system whatever it needs to prosecute criminals and lock them up. These common sense policies are popular with the American people. Are Democrats willing to listen? Doesn't seem like it.
I think it's true that crime is a problem and can be a problem, but it also can be true that deploying federal agents and soldiers is not the solution. And I just completely disagree with the solution and also question the timing and why focusing on D.C., understanding that there's places like Memphis, Tennessee that are #1 on the crime list that desperately need federal resources and collaboration with federal government in order to figure this out. Across the country, that would be lovely.
But you recognize that D.C. is a unique case.
Yeah, I know. So you can start
federally
here.
owned.
And a lot of what you can do here, you can't do in other states. And I think Muriel Bowser has been very open and welcome to getting the resources. But you have to remember why I'm looking at D.C., like why it didn't need that much help is because a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, in March 2024, the Secure D.C. Act passed. And it actually was largely successful. Part of the reason why D.C. is having a 30-year low in crime. And so even though some people are arguing with the polls, the fact is that it's went down since the most terrible time, which was pandemic and right afterwards. And some things that happened from that Secure D.C. bill were strengthening gun penalties. So that's important, right? Because people will get charged larger, cracking down on organized theft. And so if you're looking at what you've done and seeing local leaders that have put things in place that have actually affected the city positively, why does that call for the federal government jumping in to say, oh my gosh, this was absolute chaos, this was a disaster and an emergency, when it could have just been more resources to help fund more programs like that, and also more resources to fund things like community policing.
The things you're saying. I mean, the National Guard, the federal law enforcement that's been here this week, as of, I think, Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning, in the initial sweep they did, one of the largest category of arrests they made were for possession of illegal firearms. My understanding is in most cases that's, I'm a supporter of gun rights, but that's taking weapons from people who are not supposed to have them because they have a prior conviction. Most violent crimes are committed by people who have an illegal weapon because they are not allowed under existing law. That's why I laugh when they say we need more gun control. We already have gun control, just got to enforce the one we have, which is that if you're a felon, you don't have access to a firearm. We have to enforce that. That's what the federal troops did. That's exactly what you're calling for. So we need more police resources to do that. you're right that we need, more local cops because this is going to only last for 30 days or something.
Right, it's a Band-Aid on a bigger issue. And
well,
also,
but the summer is the high crime time, so it lasts for the rest of the
everything,
summer.
like moving all the homeless population when there's under-resourced opportunities for them to find housing and shelter. So there was no plan put in place to actually put these people somewhere where they can actually recuperate properly
and shelter
start to be
is
on
the Band-Aid for that.
I'm just telling you that was one issue, but we also didn't create any programs and support local government with program creation and funds to create programs to get them out of
programs. And at some point, it's like, and
okay,
what's another
but also
program gonna
no,
do?
there are benefits of people policing the community that they belong to or are adjacent to. These are just federal troops coming in and policing people. And luckily, from what I've seen, it hasn't been extremely aggressive. But like I pointed to make sure I was sure yesterday, there was a man sitting on his front stoop, and the police stopped him, and it was a pleasant exchange. He just explained what was happening. You can't smoke outside. He wasn't smoking. The man was smoking a cigarette. He's like, I'm just letting you know, because if it is marijuana anytime down the line, that's where we come in. And so the man's on his property, again, on the stoop, like, okay. But it's also like a random form of harassment when they could have just came up with programs to better protect the city in coordination with local government. I think that's when federal and local government work best, when they work together and allow autonomy. It's a big Republican pillar stone of the entire party.
I don't want to harass people for smoking marijuana.
Or cigarettes.
Yeah, or
on their own yards,
yeah.
in their own front stoops.
Yeah, that would be bad. But
and you shouldn't also want to push homeless people to Virginia and Maryland because they can't find shelter temporarily here.
Yeah, I want
what do you mean? People
they
in
gotta go.
The next problem is with the states surrounding. The DMV is all, an area that everyone looks at wholly, and I think that is a
They
Band-Aid
should not
over.
be camping out in our city, our nation's beloved parks, monument areas, setting up tent cities.
But it's okay in Virginia?
Well, it's not okay anywhere, but it's not okay where I live, and then it's not okay anywhere. No. But then it's got to be, they got to deal with it.
And some people say look to the root cause of all these issues, right? So if we start to figure out why people are homeless, if we start to look at the economy, if we start to look at the extreme hard times some people fell on.
They're not homeless because of the economy.
No,
they're homeless
some people
because they're
are,
mentally ill
though.
and
No, that
drug
everyone
addicted.
is not mentally ill that's homeless.
In this city, the vast majority of the homeless people
Okay,
are
that's
in that
a wide
category.
cast net over a bunch of issues that have happened. And I think when you find the source of the issue, that's how you solve it permanently as opposed to for 30 days.
I mean, I moved from Detroit to here 10 years ago, and I thought the same thing because I was in Detroit. I was used to people who had lost their homes, had fallen on hard times. The reality check was living here in D.C., where the people who don't have homes is because they are violently mentally ill and drug addicted, which is a very hard problem to address.
Violently is a wrong choice of words. They are barely violent.
I mean, they're violent to themselves. They're
oh, got it.
they're putting themselves in a difficult position.